Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping directly into a living, breathing historical world to examine what is easily the most famous military gamble of the 20th century. We're going to deconstruct the July 20 plot of 1944. And we're not just going to rattle off a sequence of facts. We are looking at a tense, high-stakes collision of human psychology, military bureaucracy, and honestly, some absolutely incredible physical contingencies. For a few highly uncertain hours, the entire fate of the Nazi regime, and really the course of World War II, hung on a single telephone call, a briefcase bomb, and the willingness of German soldiers to obey orders they didn't even fully understand.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the macro-level stakes here are absolutely staggering. I mean, what does it actually take to kill a dictator when you're operating deep inside his own military apparatus? By the summer of 1944, the Allies had just landed in Normandy, the Soviet Red Army was pushing relentlessly from the east, and Germany's military position was, frankly, catastrophic. But these conspirators weren't just fighting an external war. They were up against the Gestapo, the SS, and a society completely bound by a personal, sacred oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler. To overthrow an apocalyptic regime like this, they couldn't just rely on an assassin's bullet. They needed a mechanism. They needed a systematic way to completely paralyze the state.
Listen to this chilling, secretly drafted order written by co-conspirator Major General Henning von Treschow. Quote, "The Führer Adolf Hitler is dead. A treacherous group of party leaders has attempted to exploit the situation by attacking our embattled soldiers from the rear to seize power for themselves." This is brilliant, right? The plotters knew for a fact that an assassination without a full-blown coup would just leave someone like Heinrich Himmler or Hermann Göring in charge. So they didn't just plan a murder, they built a Trojan horse. They hid their coup in plain sight, right within the regime's own military protocols.
Section 1. Anatomy of a coup. The machinery of Valkyrie.
To really grasp how close they came to succeeding, we have to look at the systemic machinery. The plotters didn't go out and invent a new army. They literally weaponized the Nazi bureaucracy against itself. The core mechanism they used was called Operation Valkyrie. Now, originally, this was an official, legitimate continuity of government plan, fully approved by Hitler himself. It was designed so that the Territorial Reserve Army could quickly mobilize to suppress revolts by the millions of forced laborers inside Germany, or to maintain order if Allied bombing destroyed communications. But General Friedrich Olbricht and Henning von Treschow secretly rewrote those orders. They completely hijacked Valkyrie. Under their modified plan, once Hitler was confirmed dead, the Reserve Army would be tricked into believing the SS was staging a coup. The regular rank-and-file soldiers would then dutifully occupy government buildings, disarm the SS, and arrest the Nazi leadership, all under the illusion that they were actually saving the state.
So who were the people actually pulling these strings? Well, it was a diverse yet very distinct coalition. You had brilliant military strategists like Olbricht and Treschow. You had the driving, relentless force of the assassin himself, Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg, and you had civilian thinkers from the Kreisau Circle like Helmut James von Moltke. But, and this is absolutely crucial to understand, we have to look at them in their true historical context. As the sources point out, these were largely conservative nationalists and aristocrats. For the most part, they were not liberal Democrats in the modern sense. These were men who had actually initially welcomed Germany's military resurgence under the regime, but were now driven by a desperate desire to regain political influence and salvage whatever remaining substance of Germany they could before total annihilation.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it highlights the true operational architecture of the plot. Claus von Stauffenberg is obviously the most famous name we associate with July 20th. But the academic research strongly emphasizes that Stauffenberg actually stepped into a highly intricate framework that was already meticulously established. Major General Treschow and General Olbricht were the primary behind-the-scenes architects here. They had literally been working on this for years. They even staged a failed assassination attempt back in March 1943, using a bomb disguised as a couple bottles of Cointreau brandy. Stauffenberg provided the vital physical access to Hitler, yes, but the operational brains of the coup belonged to Olbricht and Treschow.
But we also have to ask the big question, why? What actually shifted these career by-the-book military men from loyalists to active conspirators, guilty of high treason? The psychological catalyst for so many of them was the Eastern Front. Men like Treschow and Stauffenberg witnessed the systematic, horrific murder of Jewish civilians by the Einsatzgruppen and the utter, unspeakable brutality of the Nazi occupation in the Soviet Union. This was not just a strategic disagreement over losing a war. It was a profound moral revulsion. They came to view the regime's atrocities as a deep, indelible dishonor to the nation, eventually concluding that true loyalty to Germany now demanded the ultimate disobedience to its leader.
Section 2.
inside the wolf's lair.
Thursday, July 20, 1944. It's a sweltering summer day deep in the forests of East Prussia. All those theoretical plans are about to violently collide with physical reality. Think about the number 3 for a second. This number represents the agonizing physical reality of our assassin. Back in April 1943, Stauffenberg was critically wounded in Tunisia by an Allied air attack. He lost his right hand, his left eye, and 2 fingers on his remaining hand. He only had 3 fingers left on his left hand. And yet, in a stiflingly hot, cramped anteroom at the Wolf's Lair, with only minutes to spare and a senior aide rushing him to get to the briefing, he had to use a pair of modified pliers with those 3 fingers to crush the acid capsule of a British-made chemical time pencil just to arm the plastic explosives. It was an incredibly slow, agonizing process. Because of his severe disabilities and that sudden interruption, he was only able to arm one of the 2 explosive charges he brought with him. The ticking clock of this operation is just incredibly tense. It's minute by minute. At 12:30 p.m., Stauffenberg enters the briefing room. At 12:37 p.m., he positions his heavy briefcase under the table, right near Hitler. Then he quietly excuses himself, claiming he needs to make an urgent phone call back to Berlin. He leaves the building, walking rapidly toward his waiting car. And at exactly 12:42 p.m., the bomb detonates with tremendous, deafening force. Stauffenberg watches the explosion from a distance, sees the utter devastation of the building, and is absolutely 100% convinced that no one inside could have possibly survived.
But, as we know, history is rarely inevitable, right? It's shaped by these tiny, unpredictable contingencies. Because of a massive summer heat wave, the military briefing had been moved out of Hitler's concrete underground bunker and into a lightly constructed wooden hut above ground. Furthermore, shortly after Stauffenberg left the room, another officer, Colonel Heinz Brandt, unwittingly moved the briefcase just a few inches, right behind a massive, heavy oak trestle supporting the map table. When the bomb went off, that thick oak absorbed the absolute brunt of the blast directed at Hitler, and because they were in a wooden hut on a hot day, the open windows allowed the explosive pressure to vent outward rather than being contained. 4 men were killed, but Adolf Hitler survived with just burst eardrums and singed trousers.
Section 3. The Benler Block Collapse. Let's move to Berlin and see how this builds, because as Stauffenberg bluffed his way past the security checkpoints and flew back to the capital, he firmly believed he'd succeeded. But back at the military headquarters, a rapid, incredibly tense psychological unraveling was taking place. First, a co-conspirator at the Wolf's Lair failed to completely sever communications, which allowed word to leak that Hitler had actually survived. Second, General Albrecht fatally hesitated in Berlin, losing hours of crucial momentum before finally launching Valkyrie. Third, once Hitler recovered enough to make phone calls, he personally got on the line and empowered Major Otto Riemer to ruthlessly regain control of Berlin. And finally, when the coup clearly began to falter, the commander of the Reserve Army, General Friedrich Fromm, who totally knew about the plot but has strategically sat on the fence, turned violently against the conspirators just to save his own skin.
The aftermath inside the Benler Block courtyard was utterly chaotic and bloody. By nearly midnight, Fromm had forcefully regained control. In a desperate, frantic attempt to cover his own tracks and silence the men who could testify to his complicity, Fromm held a fast, drumhead court-martial. He immediately sentenced Stauffenberg, Albrecht, and 2 other officers to death. They were led down into the courtyard, illuminated only by the harsh headlights of idling military vehicles, and swiftly executed by a firing squad. But ironically, Fromm's ruthless attempt to prove his absolute loyalty completely failed. He rushed to Joseph Goebbels the next day to claim credit for stopping the coup, was immediately arrested, and was later executed by the regime for cowardice anyway.
Section 4. Echoes of the Resistance.
The failure of July 20th unleashed a horrific purge, with Hitler destroying practically every remaining center of opposition. But when we step back and look at the macro-historical consequences and the complex moral legacy of these individuals, we actually see deep internal conflict even within the resistance itself. Helmuth James von Moltke and several members of the Kreisau Circle actually opposed the assassination plot. Why? They feared the Dolchstoß Legende, the stab-in-the-back myth. They strongly argued that assassinating Hitler without a public trial would bypass the rule of law, prevent a legitimate, necessary judicial reckoning for Nazi crimes, and potentially turn Hitler into a martyr for future generations. They wanted to build a new democratic order founded on justice, not just initiate another violent transfer of power.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with a profound, lingering question. If we strip away the pure, unblemished hero myth, who really were the men of July 20th?
Were they genuine champions of modern democracy? Or were they desperate conservative nationalists making a final play to salvage their shattered country? And perhaps more importantly, does their specific political ideology truly matter when we consider that they were among the very few actually willing to sacrifice their lives to stop an absolute, apocalyptic evil? It's a complex, multi-layered historical reality that absolutely demands our reflection. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the past.